না 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 আপনি বসুন বসুন এসো রাখুন এটা দিয়েছিল রাজেশকে
এসে খুব ভালো হয়েছে দিদি
আগেটা দিয়ে দাও
আমি এখানেই আছি এই পাশেই আছি হ্যাঁ
মাথায় মাইকের কাছে থেকে
Thank you. Shubho Apuranha. I begin by conveying my deep respect to Sri Aurobindo and Mother, and also I express my deep thankfulness to the audience who are present here today, and also to the organizing conveners of these seminars, especially to Mr. Ashim Ghoshal and Mr. Prasad, who has given me this opportunity to speak in this occasion. In fact, I have been suggested by them to speak on Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga and spiritual evolution of man. That means I will be speaking on Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics, which is one of the aspects of philosophy. Now, Aurobindo, we know at one time, at one occasion, when he was requested by Professor Radhakrishnan to contribute an article to his one of the publications, he refused and said, "Oh, no, I am not a philosopher." But we must not judge Aurobindo, Professor, but only just by this remark. In fact, Sri Aurobindo himself, when he was writing Arya as an editor, he confessed that he became a philosopher when he tried to experience his own spiritual experiences, all his spiritual experiences, when he tried to express it in language, it took the shape of the life divine. And in fact, if we try to understand Sri Aurobindo's thought and thought behind all sorts of his activities, definitely we have to know Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, which is truly conveyed by his The Life Divine. Now here I'll be speaking exclusively from Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine. Now, one of the aspiration that we find is common in most human hearts, maybe in all human hearts, that was given voice long back in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Tamaso mam jyotir gamayo, mrittur mam amrita gamayo. That is, take me from darkness to light and take me from death to immortality. That is one of the crucial concepts that has been utilized and that has been expressed by Sri Aurobindo throughout his Life Divine when he was explaining human condition, what we are as human beings, what we are after as human beings, what are our objectives, what are our aims. So these are typically philosophical questions, and philosophical questions do not bother only the philosophers, but we know that it bothers any and everyone, even a man in the street, a commoner, also often bothered by this sort of questions. So Sri Aurobindo, in his metaphysics, in his Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo has accorded the summit of the creation to man. This credibility goes to man, according to Sri Aurobindo, because man has attained the utmost grade of consciousness and knowledge for which he is competent. That is, man has reached the summit of creation. But still, that man also tries to find out answers to the question about the very meaning, purpose of his human existence. This cannot be put aside from man. Now, man, but how do we characterize man? Man has been characterized mainly as a mental being. That is, Sri Aurobindo, I will come to that portion very soon. Sri Aurobindo is explaining his metaphysical position. He is following a kind of evolutionary theory. And this evolutionary theory is, to a certain extent, of course, is one of the fruits we must accept of modern Western science. And Sri Aurobindo does not deny that evolutionary theory, but at the same time, Sri Aurobindo shows that evolutionary theory was contained in our Vedic tradition, in our ancient Vedic and Upanishadic literature. Now, in the present state of evolution, so he believes in the theory of evolution, that is nature. Again, we'll have to keep in mind some of the terms that are used by Sri Aurobindo are used in different senses. Now, when he writes nature with capital N, nature stands for an absolute power. And in that sense, nature, he would say, in a sense, can be considered an aspect of the divine. And nature, when used in small letter, it is nature as we generally, from our commonsensical perspective, we understand nature. Now, Sri Aurobindo found that this what I can say, this aspiration is very much within human heart, that is to go beyond itself. To go beyond itself. Man has reached the summit of creation because among the evolutionary beings, man is, so far as we know, is the last stage. But for Sri Aurobindo, man is not the final stage of evolution. In the present state of evolution, man is at the summit of creation, but that does not indicate that the final state of evolution has been realized. Rather, he believes that the culmination of consciousness is yet to come. This is important, that man has reached a certain stage which may be considered as the summit according to the present parameter, but that is not the final state. So Sri Aurobindo pointed out that man cannot be nature's last poise. His evolutionary theory is also a theory which also believes in development of consciousness. That is, in his metaphysics, the ultimate is consciousness. And this consciousness has been described by Sri Aurobindo as Shat Chit Ananda. Shat, it stands for existence, Chit for consciousness and consciousness power, that is Chit Shakti, and finally Ananda, bliss. And according to him, as in the science, as in the materialistic theories we find, whenever the question arises, what is the ultimate from which all this creation has come into being? They would speak of matter. Though we know that even among the scientists, how to describe that matter, what is the real status of this matter, that is equally a question of great debate and doubt. But Sri Aurobindo would speak for consciousness as the source of everything. And this consciousness is one. It is ultimate, it is one. And in Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics, all that we call creation, all that we call existence, beings, these are all just but journey of consciousness. Actually, according to his theory, this ultimate consciousness is both silent and it is active. It is passive and it is active. And from this active state of consciousness, all this creative that we find, that creation, creative aspect that follows. Now, the real sense of progress of man does not lie merely in restatement in slightly different terms of what physical nature has already accomplished, nor can the ideal of humanity be simply the animal repeated on higher scale of mentality. So, man, according to Sri Aurobindo, a quotation from his The Life Divine, man has seen that there can be a higher status of consciousness than his own. The evolutionary urge is there in parts of mind and life. The aspiration to exceed himself is delivered and articulate within him. He has become conscious sorry he has become conscious of a soul. He has become conscious of self. He has become conscious of spirit. I would like to remind that here, when Sri Aurobindo is speaking that man has become conscious of his soul, spirit and self, he is also referring to the rishis, yogis of the ancient periods, and also he is referring to his own spiritual experiences. Maybe we, as very ordinary, normal human beings, we may not be that much aware, but still we can feel that there is something within us which we cannot comprehend. May not be always, but maybe sometimes we are also brought nearer to that concept of consciousness, which we call equivalent to soul, self, spirit. Now, the whole thesis that we find in Sri Aurobindo, it is the thesis of integral unity of Brahman. I said very briefly that ultimate source for Sri Aurobindo is one eternal being, and that is Satchidananda. And that Satchidananda he calls Brahman. So here we find that Sri Aurobindo is also following Indian spiritual tradition when he calls the highest being according to his metaphysical standpoint is Brahman. Now, when Sri Aurobindo speaks of this Brahman, he brings in two different concepts. One of involution of Brahman, and the other is evolution of Brahman. Now, Brahman as the creator, that is active Brahman, that comes down. Now, why does this Brahman comes down? Sri Aurobindo here brings in the concept of Leela, concept of Maya, but we should keep in mind that though Sri Aurobindo speaks about Maya, Leela, he is not speaking in the same way as Shankaracharya has explained his Advaita Vedanta position. His position is very, very different from Advaita position of Shankaracharya. Now, to attain mental or spiritual life, it has not been ascertained that the bodily life has to be abundant. So when he is talking about involution, that is because of ignorance that Brahman veils himself under its veil, and that is involution, that is gradually Brahman comes down to the what we called the world, cosmos, and it assumes different, here we find that different layers and subsequently different forms. First, it takes the form of matter, material form. First it is spirit, and as a spirit, when it comes down, it takes the form of mind, mental, and as a mental, that is mind in capital M, and then it assumes mental form. Then it assumes form of life with capital L, and then it assumes life forms. And then at last it takes the form of matter and it assumes material forms. This is the chart of involution that we get from Sri Aurobindo, that is spirit, the ultimate absolute, veiling itself under the ignorance, it thus way involves itself in material existence. And from this stage it makes again evolution, that is involution, that is coming down, that is journey of Brahman in different stages from its absolute status in the form of, say, first spirit, then it takes the form of, say, mind, then life, then matter. Now, in the process of evolution, what first came down, that is involution. In the state of involution, what was first, that becomes the last in the stage of evolution. In the case of evolution, evolution begins from the end point of involution, that is from the matter. That is, involution starts from the spiritual stage and gradually it comes down to the material level, and from the material level evolution begins. So involution and evolution, they maintain a kind of, we can say, inverse relation in Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics. And here one thing is very important, that in this system, the role of individual man is very important. Now, how does man comes into the being? Now, man actually, in the process of involution, first we find that in the spirit gradually comes to the level of matter. Now, when there is evolution, now Sri Aurobindo, when he speaks of involution, we can say he is putting forth a kind of transcendental argument. Here he says that we must accept the necessity of involution, and he also says that whatever is involved must evolve. These are his primary premises, from which he comes to the thesis of evolution. And in the case of evolution, matter, again when it takes form, it becomes individual materials, like say body. And according to Sri Aurobindo, what is called the self, soul, ultimate Brahman, these are all hidden in the matter. This is in the matter. So, in the matter, life evolves. That is, evolution of life happens in the matter. Life can evolve because life is already contained in the matter. And in this connection, we find that in Sri Aurobindo, he believes in a kind of principle which we called, according to Indian philosophical position, that is kind of Shatkarjabad. That is, whatever comes out, the effect must be contained in the cause. And we will see finally that because he believes in this theory that cause and effect are not totally distinct, but effect has to be contained in the cause. So actually when something happens, it is actually manifestation of some aspect of the cause. And similarly, Sri Aurobindo would say in the higher stage of evolution, after the evolution of life forms and life in it with capital L as a layer of existence, there is evolution of mind and also mind form. Now that also happens in life. That is, mind evolves in life. And another very important addition of Sri Aurobindo is that as the process of evolution proceeds, this process of evolution never discards its earlier stages. So, its stage of body, its stage of life, all these are taken forward also in the man as a mental being. But man is, of course, primarily a mental being. Man is the first mental being. Prior to man, there were no mental beings. So man. Now, in this connection, we must observe that man as an individual and man as universal, that is man with capital M and man with small m, both are very, very important in Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics. Now, in his exceptional way, Sri Aurobindo harps that the individual's contribution to the world's action is imperative. That is, individual has some definite contribution to the world play. The world play or lila, the term he often uses, lila. Of course, not in a Shankarite sense, is very much indeed in need of an illumined individual in its play or action. That is, individual illumination of the individual results from the conscious manifestation of the transcendent in the individual. Why individual man is important? Because the transcendent aspect of the highest Brahman, though Brahman is never exhausted, Brahman manifests itself in various ways, but the oneness of the Brahman is never lost. The totality of the Brahman is never lost. Brahman remains what it is. Here we must remember one of the very important line again from the Upanishad, that is here, whatever Purna, Brahma is Purna, so whatever is taken from the Purna, Purna remains the same Purna, whatever is added to the Purna, Purna remains the same from Purna. So here that is the arithmetic. This is not the arithmetic that we follow in our ordinary, in our parlance. It is different arithmetic. That is the Brahman as such. It is always one. And its totality, its integrality is never lost by any addition or by any deduction. Now, here we must note one important difference of Sri Aurobindo from the traditional Indian philosophical point of view. In traditional Indian philosophy, when there is illumination of the individual, that is when individual is totally illumined, individual is liberated. That is called the liberation of the individual. But Sri Aurobindo does not subscribe to that point of view. That is not the purpose of the individual's existence. Individual may obtain liberation, not that he denies, but he says that obtaining liberation is not the only purpose of individual. Then what else is the purpose of individual's existence? Now he says, rules out the possibility of removing the individual, the very act of illumination, because when, according to the traditional theory, individual is liberated, that individual is no longer in existence as an individual. But he says, Sri Aurobindo, this is where he differs from the traditional schools of Indian philosophy, which would like to uphold this as the law, that is traditional Indian philosophy. He argues the individual is the source, center of the whole universal consciousness, and the world transcendent, embraces the universe, is one with it, and does not exclude with it. Now, this individual, he believes, as I have already pointed out, Sri Aurobindo viewpoint is so, I can say, is so huge. There are so many different layers in his viewpoint, and there are so many areas of his originality and his explanation that it is very difficult to make clear everything. But for Sri Aurobindo, as I pointed out in the very beginning, that Brahman that he admits is integral Brahman. And Brahman, we know, is consciousness. And it is consciousness, according to Sri Aurobindo, is of the transcendent aspect of Brahman, cosmic or universal aspect of the Brahman, and also the individual aspect of Brahman. And according to his view, this Brahman as soul is present in every entities of the world. Brahman is present in matter, Brahman is present in life and life forms, Brahman is found in mental being and mental form, but that is not the end of the evolution of the Brahman. As I have already pointed out, that for Sri Aurobindo, the very beginning step of involution is the last step of evolution in his view. So he considers that individuals' goal, if individuals' goal, purpose of existence is considered as only liberation from this world, because this world is full of sorrow, death, and all kind of evils, then that would be, according to Sri Aurobindo, would be one of the very selfish agendas of the individual being's purpose of existence. So the individual, according to Sri Aurobindo, the individual's aspiration should not be for his own individual self's escape from the world, because it is infested with death, sorrow, and suffering. But he believes that the individual has some central role to play in the whole process of evolution. Now, the most striking is Sri Aurobindo's reiteration of individual human beings' contributory role in the enormous movement toward recovery. Recovery of what? Recovery of this veil of ignorance under which the consciousness got itself veiled. Because consciousness also, that is also a play, a lila of consciousness, and in that way consciousness awakens individual humans to play the objective of the consciousness. So according to Sri Aurobindo, that is this recovery of consciousness from nations, from inconscience, that is the true, genuine purpose of individuals' existence. Thus, it has been clarified that seeking to come out of the involved state is seeking recovery from the state of nations. It is through conscious individual being that this recovery is possible. Now, how this is possible? Because this individual consciousness is integral, it is part of the integral consciousness. Individual consciousness integrally related to the universal or cosmic consciousness. It is integrally related to the transcendent consciousness. So, of course, here one question may arise. Why do individuals have to involve itself so urgently and so aspiringly for this recovery? Now, one may ask, can't nature recover itself by its own natural way? Because ultimately, if we go through Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, he says that these are all nature, that is God, and Purusha. These are all aspects of one integral Brahman. So why does he put so much emphasis on individual consciousness? Now, according to Sri Aurobindo, the most important factor is that individual consciousness has this capability, this competence to be aware of its consciousness. to be aware of itself, soul and spirit. And if individual consciousness involves itself in this process of recovery, then only the nature's progress that can be hastened, that nature will be able to completely recover itself to a certain extent quite easily without much other delays. Now, in this connection, I will have to omit many things, but I will go mainly to the main theme, that is spiritual consciousness. Why this necessity for spiritual consciousness? Why does Sri Aurobindo speak for the evolution of spiritual consciousness? Here in some of the lines, I would like to go threadbare from Sri Aurobindo's own writing, because this is again the most difficult aspect of Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics. Now, Sri Aurobindo strongly asserted that man should not remain confined, bound by its mentality alone. That is, he conceives there will be further evolution, and this he conceives not blindly, because he gives evidence that this desire, not desire, but I should say aspiration, is there in human beings to transcend itself. He quotes from Upanishad, where we find that tamosho mang jyotir gamayo, that is, take me from the darkness to the light, take me from death to the immortality. So this aspiration is within human bosom. That cannot be neglected. That cannot be discarded. And why that is there without any explanation? Sri Aurobindo explains that is because that includes the purpose, the very meaningfulness of human existence. Sri Aurobindo says that the evolution of the spiritual man, who in a supreme defiance to the reign of matter, that is, who, when spiritual man, who will be considered as a spiritual man, when that particular stage has come into being, that when there is a defiance of matter, that is, when it can defy matter, supreme defiance to the reign of matter, awake in himself, that is, a spiritual man can awaken in himself to the hidden Godhead, become the hunter after the invisible, the mystic and the spiritual seeker. Only that can be the stage of the evolution of a spiritual man. Now here we are also dealing with man, that is mental being, which is seeking to transcend itself. Now, he considers this to be the meaning, this the purpose of the terrestrial existence of individual soul. That is, individual soul is seeking this, that is, it seeks to arrive at a stage where it can defy matter, where it can awaken within itself this spiritual consciousness, when it can seek to be one with this spiritual consciousness. It is a state of invisible mystic, a super hunter and the spiritual seeker. This is how he describes the state of spiritual evolution. Now, Sri Aurobindo argues for developing a spiritual being out of a man as a mental being. He clearly distinguishes, here this is also very, very important, he clearly distinguishes between man as a mental being and a spiritual being. Again, I would like to quote some lines from Sri Aurobindo. This then, what has to be brought out? What has to be brought out? The clear distinction between the spiritual and the mental. The nature of this evolution and the factors which make it possible and inevitable that there should be this emergence of the spirit in its true distinct character. Not, this is important, not remaining as it is now. In fact, while discussing Sri Aurobindo's position, I have also said that man is in the highest summit because man is aware of soul, spirit in himself. Excuse me. But just this awareness does not transform man into a spiritual being. So he harps on maintaining a clear distinction between spiritual and the mental. And so he says that we must acknowledge emergence of the spirit in man in its true distinct character. When we are now in our mental state aware of spirit, soul, we are not aware of spirit, we are not aware of self, we are not aware of soul in its distinctive feature. So that realization that has to come in its distinctive features. So I would sum up, the clear distinction between the spiritual and the mental has to be maintained, that there should be emergence of the spirit in its distinct character, and this emergence of spirit should not be like now. Now how? Now spirit or soul or self about which we are sometimes feel that we are aware. How we are aware? Sometimes we consider this spirit as something subordinate to our mind, that a spirit will have to obey the principles, laws of mind. Or sometimes we accept spirit may be to a certain extent superior to mind or mental being, but never we are aware of spirit in its true distinctive feature, in its true distinctive characteristics. So again, I'll quote some lines from Sri Aurobindo's Letters on Yoga, where he writes, consciousness is usually identified with mind, but mental consciousness is only the human range. In fact, here we find enormous difference between Aurobindonian standpoint and the Western standpoint. In the West, we don't find any distinction between mind and consciousness, mind and spirit, mind and soul, and mind and self. But this is the very, very peculiarity of the Indian philosophy. That is, here we always find that we speak of mind, we speak of utilities and purposes of mind, but we never consider mind. Of course, here I am referring to philosophers who belong to the spiritualist tradition. Not here I am referring to the materialist like Charvakos. So he says that consciousness is usually identified with mind, but mental consciousness is only the human range which no more exhausts all the possible ranges of consciousness than human exhausts all the colors. Now we often say that our physical senses are everything. Whatever is graspable by our physical senses, that is the truth that we accept as true. This is the materialist perspective. And often we are led by that perspective. We say that whatever is graspable by our physical sense, that is only true, that only exists. And whatever our physical senses cannot grasp, that does not have any existence. But Sri Aurobindo is very much against this position. And here also we must remember that Sri Aurobindo belongs very much to the Indian Vedic and Upanishadic tradition. He was and he was and he is an original Indian philosopher, but he belongs to that tradition. So here he will speak of then how there can be spiritual evolution. Now here Sri Aurobindo brings, in the case of human beings, concept of two sorts of evolution, inner evolution and outer evolution. But I don't think I will have time. Then I'll have to skip some portions and I'll go to the section where Sri Aurobindo is speaking about our awareness of self as a spiritual substance of our being and existence, which is exceeding even the soul individuality. So spiritual being, that is being aware of spirit, is exceeding our soul individuality. At one time, so long we are confined to the mental level, we are very much bound, we are very much caught by our bond of being an individuality, that is soul individuality. But when we ascend, or when, even if we don't ascend, when we have some kind of awakening, awareness of spiritual, we transcend this level of soul individuality. So this transcendence of soul individuality is one of the features of being aware and awakened to spirituality, and also at the same time spreading itself into universality. That is, we don't exclude ourselves as an individual. We do not remain confined within the bound of narrow individuality, but we extend our expansion. That is, we embrace universality, surpassing all dependence. This is also another requisite of being aware or being awakened to spiritual consciousness, surpassing all dependence on any natural form or action, and also extending itself upward into transcendence, the limits of which are not visible to our physical eyes. And Sri Aurobindo, as a yogi, as a spiritual person, came across these experiences and tries to express his fruits of his yogic experiences in the language of a philosopher. Of course, he says, he reiterates that yes, when he is trying to express his experiences, he becomes a philosopher. He has to pursue this line, and he pursues this quite vividly. The various levels of actions, movements of spiritual consciousness in us. Then, so what is spirituality? What is being spiritual being? What is evolving to that level? Spirituality is in its essence an awakening to the inner reality of our being, to a spirit, self, soul, which is other than our mind, life and body. And what else? An aspiration. That aspiration that was very vaguely in our human bosom when we were confined to the mental being, that we want to escape from this death. We want to reach the level of immortality that becomes more vivid. So an inner aspiration to know, to feel, to be that, to enter into contact with the greater reality beyond and pervading the universe. Because universe itself is also the creation of this spirit, this Brahman. Not that body, life, mind, these are creators. Truly creator is the spirit, is the Brahman. So the first feature of spirituality that has been described as an awareness of this inner reality of the spirit, which is called by many other names. An inner aspiration to know, to feel, to be that, to enter into contact with the greater reality beyond and pervading the universe, which also inhabits our being. And again, he writes, to be in communion with it. Now, when we read political philosophy, social philosophy that are given to us by Sri Aurobindo, we speak about human unity, we speak about world unity. These are all, in fact, product of Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics. But of course, Sri Aurobindo reminds that this spirituality is something more genuine, something real than this craving for political unity, social unity. But that is also important. That is something we must also try. And what happens when we come in contact with the spirit, with the soul? A turning, that is a turn. His language, a turning comes, that is change of direction. Actually, so long we were exclusively mental being, our direction was different. As a mental being, we can seek many things. We can seek pleasure, we can seek wealth, we can seek happiness. But when we transcend to this stage, there is a turning, that is change of direction, a conversion, that is a totally difference, that is we are converted, a transformation, that is we get transformed, that is we reorganize our being in a different manner. And it also represents a combined state of conation, that is action, cognition and affective trait. Here we must keep in mind that Sri Aurobindo was very much influenced by Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and from his interpretation of the Gita we find that he also finds an integrality between karma, between Gyan and Bhakti. That is his yoga. So, according to Sri Aurobindo, that is reaching, just becoming aware, awakening spirituality. That is also requires this kind of awareness, that is awareness of integrality between works, between knowledge and love, or we can say bliss, ananda. So finally we find that it is quite clear that gaining ground with the spirit in mind, so that is the level when mind is aspiring as mind to transform, that is spirit, at that stage spirit evolves in mind, this evolution of spirit in mind, that at that level mind is still there. There are again further stages, but I don't want to enter into those stages. But another important thing, that so many things Sri Aurobindo speaks about, and often objections are brought against Sri Aurobindo, that Sri Aurobindo does not have much reasoning, he does not provide any arguments, he just on the basis of his spiritual experiences, he provides to us his metaphysics. How can it be considered to be philosophy proper? This is one of the, we can say, a common objection that has been brought against Sri Aurobindo. But here we should not forget that Sri Aurobindo was also very much aware that without method, without methodology, that knowledge, the goal of action, and also love, these are not possible. So according to Sri Aurobindo, we know one of his very favorite line is that all life is yoga. He does not leave the meaning of yoga undefined and vague. So what is yoga according to Sri Aurobindo? According to Sri Aurobindo, yoga is a methodized efforts towards self-perfection. But how this methodized effort towards self-perfection can be achieved? Here Sri Aurobindo says, by bringing out the potentialities that are within us. This method of expression of secret potentialities is carried on by nature and in the cosmos, and through man by his activity, by his works. So works is also important. So when we read Sri Aurobindo's interpretation of Isha Upanishad, we find that how different is Sri Aurobindo's interpretation of Isha Upanishad from that of Shankaracharya and also from that of the Mimamsakas. He does not say that knowledge alone will be enough. He does not say work, that is as it was accepted by the Mimamsakas and which later take the status of different sacrificial rites and rituals. And we know how the ritualistic tradition also became very forceful at one stage in our Indian culture, in our country. But he said that we have to take into consideration integrally the both contribution of action and also that of that of knowledge, and also we must take into consideration some favor, that is some love, that will be also equally important in his integralization process. So Jogo is often misunderstood as mystical and abnormal. And according to Sri Aurobindo, Jogo is actually adopting this method of work energy that is going on in the cosmos. That is just adopting within the self this methodized technique. So without any technique, as we generally say in Western philosophy, if we don't have any epistemology, how can we have metaphysics? Now, when we are talking about epistemology, there is notion of logos, that is very much the notion of reason, that is taken as the supreme. But Sri Aurobindo does not disregard that there has to be reasoning, there has to be experiences, there has to be physical experiences, but he admits something more. And when he makes provision for something more, he can explain wideness, breadth, and depth of his philosophical approach. So therefore, he advocates integral Jogo of knowledge, love, and works. And in his view, this has to be extended into a Jogo of spiritual and Gnostic self-perfection. All these things will come after later. But first, that this spiritual transformation that is vital for us as mental being. And later on, he will speak of psychological transformation, supramental transformation, and other levels of transformation. But at least we as mental being, we must, if we follow Sri Aurobindonian line, if we think the purpose of our existence as human beings is the recovery of consciousness, that is, recovery of consciousness from the clutches of inconscience, then we must at least aspire for spiritual awakening, awareness. So thank you. This is all that I can say for today.
Thank you very much, Professor Sanyal, for your illuminating speech and laying threadbare what is normally considered as the complexities of Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics. I know after listening to her speech, I presume that most of you will have a lot of questions, but unfortunately, we will not be able to have Professor Sanyal because she is indisposed and we would like to take leave early. She will not be with us throughout the seminar. It is very unfortunate, but that is the case. So what we'll do now is we'll break for lunch, and it is 1:52, and we'll reassemble after lunch at exactly 2:52. Okay, and then post lunch we have equally illuminating and interesting lectures lined up. We have Mrs. Belu Mehra, we have Makrant Paranjveji, and Professor Dilip Roy, and of course our very own Sri Ritam Sinha, who will recount his experiences during his stay in the Sri Aurobindo Ashram as a student. Thank you very much for your patience, and then we'll try and reassemble after 1 hour and resume our seminar.